comes from the word ethnos, but it's also in terms of the word ethno-linguistic. So this means cultural, and this means language. All right, how many people groups are in the Philippines? How many languages are in the Philippines? Dialects. 4 trillion monkeys. We have the smallest monkey in the world here. Tarsier. It's in Palawan. It is in Palawan, so. Bohol. It's not in Palawan? All right, whatever. Here's a funny trick, since I'm already on a huge bunny trail. If you take that little monkey and you freak it out with a bunch of camera shots, it'll die. Because if you take too many pictures of it, it just dies. Yeah, it bangs itself on it. Yeah, it kills itself. Albino polar bear. That's right. All right, now that I'm done with my bunny trail on how monkeys kill themselves. All right, so I want you to think about the Philippines, right? Is there 100 dialects here? 100 dialects, right? There's 3 major dialects, which are Tagalog and all that. But how many islands, right? There's 7,000. 1,000? Oh, 7,000. But then, 107 what? 107? Okay. Then 3,000 inhabited, right? Or 1,400? Which one is it? I think it's 3,000. I think it's 3,200. All right, so half of them are inhabited. Okay, so the way that you look at the people groups of, let's say you take the Philippines, is that they're culturally, some of them, not all of them, a majority of them are culturally kind of the same. If you look at someone from Cebu or like Taguig or like Mindanao, culturally, you guys tend to be Catholic or something, right? You're culturally somewhere around that area. There's Spanish influence and all those things. But then if you take, like, let's say, Aldrin or Jarl, right? Manobo, that's totally different. Manobo is a completely different culture. And then they also have the Manobo language. So culturally, they're different. But if you look at, let's say, Cebuanos and then Tagalog, right? Their culture is kind of the same, but their language is different. So there alone, you already split them. And so across the entire planet, and then you have another one, right? You might have, it doesn't work that well in the Philippines. But, it doesn't work that well in the Philippines for that. But, I guess Filipino Americans, I don't know if that's a different people group. Tagalog, English, it might actually be. But essentially, these are the 2 ways that you split the people group. And so when you think of a people group, you're thinking of cultural language. So when you go to India or Indonesia or Japan or wherever you're going in the world, let's say you take India, for example. There's 1.2 billion people. But there's, I forgot the exact number, but there's more people groups in India than the entire world in that one country. Not total, but in terms of the density of how many people groups are unengaged in India, it's the most unengaged people groups in the entire planet in one country. And because there's so many different languages and there's so many different cultures, even though they're all in India, they're all different culturally or different linguistically. So that's one way that you really have to determine the people group. So let's say, the Lord's saying something like, He's called you to Africa or India. Those are very big, not just by land mass, but by the amount of different cultures and languages in a place like India. It's very broad. So when you're looking at the Great Commission, you want to be asking yourself, is there a specific people group that God is identifying myself with? So even if you're called to the Philippines itself has over 100, maybe 200 people groups. So you want to ask yourself, well, are you called to the Philippines or are you called to the Catholics of the Philippines inside of Manila or something in Luzon? Or are you called to like the Cebuanos on that island of Cebu or something? Or are you called to the Muslims in Taguig or in Mindanao? And then even in the Muslim area, there's still multiple cultures inside of them. The largest Muslim tribe in the Philippines that's unengaged, I think it's engaged now, but unreached, is the Maguindanao tribe. So that's 1.2 million of them. And I think the next one after that is the Tausug. And so they have 20,000 of them living in Taguig, the place where you're going to be going to, which is one of the reasons why it's so strategic to us, because it's more difficult to get into Mindanao that way. But that's what you're thinking about. So when you're thinking about the Lord calling you somewhere, you're also trying to identify, is there some type of people group? If not, then there is, but they're very different. For example, human trafficking in America is one way, but human trafficking in a Islamic country is completely different. And the way that the way that the trafficking even happens in different cultures is radically different. I think a Muslim prostitute is raped 10 times more than an American one, if not 100, something like that. Because an American, to me, that kind of, I forgot the exact statistic, but an American still believes that a woman has some kind of identity. In Islam, women are sometimes less than half a cow. So they're already less than less. So now they're a prostitute. So now they're less than less than less than less than less. So the way they treat the Muslim prostitute will be even, usually in some cases, worse than the way that they'll treat an American prostitute in certain cases. So those are like some statistics why it's even important to understand justice operates differently under different cultures. And in America, right, there's women's rights. There ain't no such thing of that in the 1040 window. In the 1040 window, you will see some of the most abused, neglected, and forgotten women on the entire planet. The most abused the most abused anything and injustice is to women over the entire planet. That's where most of that comes from. And so you have to know that the 1040 window, because there's a lack of Jesus, there's a lack of justice. And so if you're searching for injustices, you really just have to look at the place where the gospel isn't, because the worst injustices are there. The only difference is in the Western world, we talk about it. In the Eastern world, that's just life. There's no, what do you mean my wife has rights? Like, what are you talking about, women's rights? What is that? Like that, you can't talk to a Muslim man about women's rights. That doesn't exist. So they could have 10 wives, as long as they help each one the same way, they're fine. You talk to an American woman that way, you'll get a taser, right? Yeah, right in the jugular, right? But see, it's different. You'll see it too when you go to the 1040 window, which y'all are going to. You'll see it everywhere. You'll see kids getting abused right down the street. You'll see a wife getting slapped right in front of you. And then everyone will just be like, that's just the way it works. They don't even care about it. They'll actually be thinking that's what she gets. Like, you'll see it. It'll break your heart.
So will like some of us go to jail? Because real, like I was at like Restaurant Depot in Kansas City, and like there was a Muslim couple.
Yeah.
And, like, he tried to snatch her.
Yeah.
And I looked at him, and she walked away. I'm like, thank you. Like, so I don't, like, what do we do? Like, do we just...
I think, one thing that will kind of happen to you probably is you'll see it everywhere. And then you'll kind of see that there is hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of people that live like that. And then you'll probably go like, Jesus needs to tell me to do something with my life. Because if you fix one thing, you have to fix the whole country. So it's like, it's not even, it's not. Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. That's where your call becomes a part of your life. Because now you're like, okay, this isn't just like a trip I'm on. Like, this is like, God's got to impact this entire country. And then that's where the entrance point of your calling usually begins. When you see something so beyond yourself, you're like, okay, this is gonna take my life. So, but that's good, because that's how Jesus is. He's overtaken by the despair of humanity. And so he's given himself to save it. So you'll see a lot of stuff. That's why it's easy for us to do missions in the Philippines. It's way easy. I mean, it's not like easy in a sense of doing it, but executing it has a lot more of a mainstream than it does going to a 1040 nation. And so that's why I want everybody to see a harvest also in a 1040 nation too. Because the harvest still exists, except that the things that people go against is way different. And that's what really creates a balance. You have to understand the whole world to see that balance there. All right, let's go a little bit further. Let's go to number 2, Bible for all. That was explained a little bit in the video in yesterday's session. But just to recap it, you want the Bible in a language where inside of their heart, they'll understand it. That's the key point there. So, but the Bible itself, like if it's like in between a King James version and like no version, I'd still give a King James version, just for the record. Because I still think if you can even get a Bible, that's still good. But the mission doesn't really stop there. Because if you get them a King James version, but they can't read, that's completely irrelevant to them. So you have to realize too that us giving someone a Bible isn't the end of the game. Us teaching them how to live from the Bible is where we really want to be living. So that's with that finish line as well. We want the Bible to have, everyone to have access to the Bible in their heart language. And so a very key place to start there is translating it and getting it orally done. I don't know if I want to share this, but I probably will. Lauren Cunningham, right, is just a crazy apostle guy, right? In the video you saw him yesterday, he's so nice. He looks like a little teddy bear. He's nothing like that in person. So he's just really intense. When I first saw him, I had no idea he was that intense. But anyways, he was like, okay, everyone, we're going to be going to Mongolia. So if we're going to go to Mongolia, we need to translate all the Bibles. So he says, don't make it complicated. This is the way that you do it. You go find a Mongolian friend that speaks a language. Then he grabs somebody. And then he says, okay, you're Mongolian. You do it like this. And Jesus said in the beginning. Then they say it. Then you record her. And then so she says in Mongolian that, he was the Word and the Word was made flesh. And then she repeats it. And then you just record it that way the whole way through. And then he said, don't make it complicated. Just do it that way. And you translated the Bible. I was like, gosh, this guy thinks so different. So, but that's it too. But that's the best way to get the heart language is just having someone that speaks it, do it. So just think about those things as well, all right? Anyways, that's a funny story, but it's true because it's happening. All right, the next one is evangelism for all. All right, so there is a coherent age where that we're trying to go after. It's when they can comprehend sin. When they're able to understand sin and righteousness and make a choice between the two, that's essentially the age where you want to see the gospel penetrate at least. I think it begins around 4 is where some people say it starts. But, okay, so that's one. The gospel for everybody of coherent age. Next one, the gospel in a way that they'll understand it. It has to be relevant to them. And so you have to present the gospel in a way that they'll actually get what you're saying. And the next one is comprehensive. It's you want to share it in a way that they really understand what salvation and faith is, so that they get the whole gist of it. Again, the gospel isn't a motivational speech. Even though it's good news, it's way different than a motivational speech. But you have to share what all of the entrance points is for faith to be real. Like obedience, your life exchanged, everything that we shared about throughout the whole school. All right, so that's evangelism for all, just so that you understand the same framework there. Because I'm going to take this framework, I'm going to multiply it across the entire session or across the entire teaching. All right, so the next one is church for all. These are some attributes of a church planting movement, which I'll get into in 2 days or so. But the idea there is that you have a vibrant movement in every, this might get a little bit too much, like an omega zone. You have a vibrant movement in every single people group that's happening. So a movement is what Paul planted. He planted a movement in every area of the people groups when he was alive, and then they multiplied throughout the whole people group. That's what you want in all of these areas. So again, you don't want to just see a church in Mindanao or something. You want to see a church planting movement or a church movement occur in Mindanao. Because a church building doesn't mean that there's going to be disciples and evangelism. But a church movement means that people will get evangelized, disciples will be made, pastors will be anointed, evangelism will go to the next level, and it will be multi-generational. So that's what you're going for when you look at seeing a church for all regions. All right. Let's go to the last one. This is compassion and justice, actually. Compassion and justice for all. So essentially, Jesus also said, the gospel, faith without works is dead, right? So if you have something you can give, then give it if it's one of their needs. And I'm not going to read the scripture, but Isaiah 61, you could see even just the language of Isaiah 61, rebuilding the desolated cities, giving beauty for ashes, comfort for those mourning. There's an actual physical attribute of the gospel that takes place in compassion and justice. And so the idea there is that you want to see that happen as well for all of those that are in need of it, or at least have access to it. All right, now kind of take a step back from that. All right, just go, whoa. All right, just take a step back from it. That's the framework of the Great Commission. So the thing that you might naturally do is try and zone into one thing and then make that your calling. But you want to understand that all of these components is part of the whole mandate. And so all of us have different roles though. So some people might be more compassion, justice oriented. Some might be evangelistically oriented. Some might be all of it oriented, where you're wanting to see all of it happen in the region. But you don't have to be getting it all done for you to play a role in the Great Commission. You just have to know this is what the Great Commission is about. So don't worry if you don't get all of it. Just know it's somewhat of a framework. And you're like, okay, God's calling me to compassion and justice. Maybe you're in a city or a region or a town or a community, and you need to ask the Lord to pray in all of these other components. And I'm going to go into that next with the 777. But this way, you can always look at an area and you can ask yourself, you can assess how much of the Great Commission is being completed here. Or if your church is asking you, how can we become more missional? Then this is a really great place to start, because it gives a very comprehensive list of what it actually means to be in global missions or Great Commission. All right, here are some questions you might want to ask yourself when you're assessing. Maybe, I don't know, I'm sensing the Holy Spirit talking about church or something. I feel like some of you may be thinking of a location already. So let's just take that example. If you're already thinking of a place or thinking of a region, here are some questions you want to ask yourself. And you can mix it a little bit with each finish line. But the first one is coming out of Luke 15:4. I shared on this yesterday, the 99 sheep. You want to ask yourself, how many lost sheep are there? Because if you want to see a whole city saved or something like that, well, how many people are in the city? Right? So in Maragondon, there's around 40,000 people. We evangelized 500 of them. We don't know exactly where else the rest went into it. Excuse me. I believe that number is going to grow dramatically. But you're thinking like, okay, well, that's 500 out of 40,000. So for us to say Maragondon is completely saved, statistically, that's even wrong, right? So you don't want to be the missionary that says that, right? You want to know what you're talking about. But you could do it with anything, compassion and justice, right? Let's say we were to take, all right, how many people in Maragondon are in poverty or something? I went to the chief of police, or one of our team members did, and they asked him, what are the major issues here? And he said none. So it's not really that big of an issue in a sense of like Naik and all that stuff. So there's robberies and probably alcoholism and gambling and stuff like that. But he said there's nothing like a major city here. Like there's no trafficking, there's no drug laundering and stuff like that. He said it's just this area, right? If you go down the street to like Naik, you already see red light district and all that stuff. So they don't have like prostitution here and all those things. It doesn't mean they don't have immorality. It just means that they have stuff like that. But, okay, so that's there. That's just compassion and justice. But then, you guys just went to a cemetery. And a lot of those people there don't have jobs. So you could assess that out of Maragondon, that's one of the areas that probably had the greatest need. And so if you numbered out the communities that had the greatest need, I think the next one is around the rice trails, and the next one is around the mountains. Those are the areas that they have the hardest way of livelihood. But you look at the region and you ask yourself, over the entire region, what are we actually dealing with? And so let's say, for example, we did this with the Philippines, one of the Maguindanao tribe, right? 1.3 million. It's hard to reach them in Mindanao, right? Most of them get killed, right? So that's one of the things there. Doesn't mean they don't get saved. It just means it's not easy to get into. But so if you look at it, well, where are all of the Maguindanao tribe and all of the Philippines? Because you're starting movements, right? It doesn't mean that you have to start in one location only. You start a movement. And so the second largest area of the Maguindanao tribe in the Philippines is in Taguig. So Taguig is heavily accessible. Like we can go, we've already went into the public schools. We're already talking to the government leaders in that area. We've already seen salvations in the Maguindanao tribe already. I think one of the Maranawa tribe, I think they recorded 60 salvations in Joshua Project. I think in our last outreach, there was definitely more than a dozen at least. So, but that's already, I'm pretty sure there's more, but because we went to all of the schools. But that's already, you see that, right? If historically this people group has 60 salvations over a period of 2,000 years, and in 1 year we saw at least 15, that means we're on the right track. We're moving towards something here. And then we're just getting started. So that's how some of that stuff works over there. But you want to know, what are you dealing with statistically? Not so that people become a statistic, but it's because, well, if there's 99 sheep, where's the one? Where are they? You want to know where they're at. So you don't want to overgeneralize any human being. You want to make sure that you are looking in the cracks, you're looking in the crannies, you're really trying to see what it is in any place that you work at. The next one is you want to ask yourself, well, who are the 99? If there's, let's say, if there's 20,000 Muslims in Taguig, well, where's the other 99 that are going after them, or the churches, right? In Taguig, it's not that many evangelistically active churches. So evangelistically active churches, I think it's less than 500 people out of a city of 1 million, right? That might even feel right? You go to different churches, they're not evangelizing so much. They might be doing different things, but they're not doing that. So you're asking yourself, okay, if there's 500 active people, but let's just say there's 10,000 Christians in Taguig, then you want to also ask yourself, well, are we able to mobilize that 10,000 people to those one, right? Are you able to mobilize the 99 sheep to the one? So let's say if even in your community, right, you might want to ask yourself, where are the 99 sheep already existing? And then how can I coordinate them or lead them so that they can go to, well, in your case, to be everyone, be anyone would actually be an unreached people group. So like that would be the same thing in your case too. You'd look at the whole region and then you'd see, who do we have that God may have saved, and how can we lead them to the ones that are lost or they may be unreached? So that's one very, very practical question I always ask myself. You're from Bago? Okay, we did our campaign there. Yeah. I remember Bago. Yeah, I remember there. You know a city when you're trying to evangelize because you start seeing all of the stuff. Yeah. So, anyways, all right. The next one is you want to ask yourself this. All right, there, you've identified where are the lost, where are the saved, kind of so to say. And then the next one is, here's another way you could grid it if you're trying to get your head wrapped around it. You could ask yourself, how far, if there was a line here, and this is saved and this is lost, how far down this line are they lost? Right? Because some of you, as you were talking yesterday, you said, well, I have family members, but they're very passive. So identifying them as saved might be a little hard. But then on the Richter scale of warm, lukewarm, hot, cold, they may be coming up somewhere in the middle-ish. Right? Or you might know in your hometown, there might be some people coming up a little bit more in the Richter scale. or not the Richter scale, but the scale. And then you might know that there's some people that are just really behind. They're very, very far and lost. All right, so you could also help that strategize the way that you think when you think of your region. All right, the next one is this. What are your current results? Very, 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 very big question. I always use this one. These are like my secret tool pouch. I have a little secret tool pouch right here, and I take out my secret tool pouch and I sprinkle it on special things and put a little seasoning on stuff. All right, this is one of them. If I'm coming into a region and I'm talking to people, I ask them, what's your vision and your dream and what's the thing that you're doing? And they might say something like, well, our heart is to see all of the youth of the entire city saved and evangelized and discipled. I'm like, okay, great. We're on the same page. I love your heart. Now, the next question, sometimes I don't ask. Okay, sometimes I don't ask the next question because it might hurt them. Okay, so then I don't, but I'm thinking in my head though, is all right, your goal is to see all of the youth saved and mobilized and become leaders. What I'm looking at next is, how much fruit do you have? So that might be like 5 people, 3 people, 1 person, 10 people. And they might, if you assess it, they might actually be the sons and daughters of the staff there or something. And so the mission is very far behind. And so I don't do that so I pick on people. I just do that so I'm like understanding where are they right now. So I understand how I can serve them. Because if I also go to another place and let's say their identity is they want to reach all of the politicians and movie stars and government officials, and that's what they want to do. And then I look at their congregation and they have all the politicians, movie stars, and all these things, like one of the churches we worked with. Then I'm like, well, you're kind of doing that. You're kind of doing a good job, because all of the main people go here that are of that caliber, that pedigree. And so then the way that you would help is, I don't know, pray for them or something, just because they're already doing it. So there's no point in trying to tell them to do something they're already doing, right? That's not unreached. That's not, there's no help that needs there. You could just encourage them maybe. Or you could be friends or whatever. Now here's the key scripture. This is what you really want to think about when you think about results and fruit. Matthew 7:18-20. This is number 2. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor can a bad tree bear good fruit. This is the one that people forget. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Therefore, by the fruits you will know them. All right, so there's this kind of theology where God likes nothing happening. Don't buy that. Because God's very big on fruit. He even tells them, look at this fig tree. There's no fruit. Cut it down and burn it. And then one of his apostles come up and say, wait. What if I put some fertilizer on it, Jesus, and I water it? Then can we save it? And then he says, sure, you can save it. But if in the next season it still doesn't bear fruit, we're burning it. So you have to understand, if whatever you're trying to do doesn't bear fruit, you need to change it. That's just how it works. Don't play the card like God sees it, because he does see it and he wants fruit. So just know that. If your fruit is salvation and disciples and justice and compassion and all these other things, then you have to truthfully ask yourself, how much of that mandate am I bearing fruit in? And then you have to work towards that. So some of this might be internal prayer conversations you're having with your region, and you're simply asking the Lord, okay, if we're starting from 0, how do we get it to 100? Right? But then you don't want to lie to yourself. If something's at 0 and you call it 100, then you're not working, you're lying to yourself. You're not being real. There's nothing wrong with something having 0 fruit, right? Jesus said, all right, go ahead. If you want fertilizer, go ahead, put on it, right? But you just have to know, in the end of the game, he's going to want fruit. So that's one of the things that you want to think about. All right, the next one is this, your exit plan. When are we finished? What's the end goal? So this is Paul, Romans 15:23. Paul said, I have no place left to work in these regions. He established a movement in each place that would multiply. And so Paul looked at Asia Minor, all the way from Illyricum down to, Rome he went last, but he also church planted there. And then he went all the way through Asian Minor. And then he looked at all of that, and he said, I have no place left to work. So now I'll go through Rome, and hopefully you'll financially partner with me. That's what Romans, the book of Romans was. It was a fundraising letter. And then he went over and said, I'll go to Spain. And the reason why he wanted to go to Spain was because he knew that was the epicenter. And I'm going to go into this in our next session of movements. But he's looking for places that he can lock down so that he could see a movement start that would finish the work. That's what he's trying to do. And so you're asking yourself, what does it look like when my community is finished? Like, what does it look like when something is transformed? You want to actually ask yourself that. Sometimes when we think of revival, you think of salvation and signs and wonders, and then you think of some things happening, but then you're asking yourself, okay, after revival and reformation and transformation, what is this thing supposed to look like in 20 years? That's your goal. That's your end game. Your end game is, what does this look like in 10 years, and how do I know I laid a foundation for that to happen? That's how you want to be thinking. All right, this isn't really DTS stuff, but whatever. Anyways, some people told me you can't teach that in DTS. It's too advanced. And I was like, I don't know. I teach this stuff all the time in every DTS, and all of my students always get it. So I'm like, right? That makes sense to you, doesn't it? It'll make more sense to you later, right? It'll make more sense to you later. It will make more sense to you later. Just remember that. Yeah, just come back and stuff. All right. Anyways. All right, so there. Those are the three things that you want to think about when you're asking yourself questions. Again, people don't get wrong answers by asking questions. They get wrong answers because they don't ask the right question. So remember, it says in the Bible, you have not because you ask not. So you sometimes have to ask the Lord the right question. It says that it's the glory of kings. It's God's glory to conceal a matter. It's the glory of kings to search it out. Part of our glory as sons of God and daughters of God is that we get to search out the mystery of what God is doing. And that's why you can't subtract critical thinking from your prayer life. You have to really understand God still requires. Here's another trick, all right? Check this out. You know that they didn't know in the Old Testament that we had a brain. That was the same place of your heart. They said it was the same place. Your thinking and your soul and your feelings all came from the seat of your heart. So when people say, it's too much thinking, that's too much thinking. That's not godly anymore. That's not even biblical. Because in the Old Testament, there was no brain. Everything came from the heart. So even all of your thinking, that's not ungodly. That's just an aspect of God making you a human being. And that's part of, we have to access everything that we are to be fully in our destiny. How many of you would only like to use your arm tomorrow? Can't use anything else. You're just going to be laying down like that. Nobody wants to be like that? Right? What about just your toe? Nobody? No one wants to be like that? Yeah, who wants to use half of their body? Right? So don't do that. You want to be... Oh, yeah. So use your entire stratosphere, so to say. Everything that God's given you, use that for his glory. That's how you engage with the Holy Spirit. All right. I'm going to draw you a picture to break down the next one. Okay, Bobby? I'm going to draw a picture of Ariella. Oops. So that y'all can stay awake with what I'm going to do next. All right, you can go to page, I think it's page 4. There's no page number on that. Is it page 5? All right. 777. All right, we're going to talk about 777. But before I do that, I'm going to draw Ariella. This is not working. All right. Okay, I can't draw the rest. Whatever. Let's just draw some feet. All right, y'all awake? There we go. There's 7. All right, there's Ariella. Every individual, including Ariella, is like that. All right, so there is a triangle, right? This is called the 777 matrix. All right? So there's 7 strategic themes. There's 7 geographic alls. And then there's 7 spheres. Every individual, if I were to draw this on a smaller scale, let's say, they cross over like this. So every strategic theme, every location on the planet, every sphere, they all interact with each other in some way. And so every human being, another way that you could look at the matrix, is that every human being comes in contact with all of these 7 things, 777. So you want to be able to identify what are these things that impact a human being. Because we're talking about impact, right? So you want to define impact. When I say, you're impacted, what do I mean? That could mean a lot of things, right? If I was in a journalism career and I said, man, that article was so impactful, that could mean that you made them cry, right? If you were listening to a song and you were like, and then you're like, wow, take off your headphones, you're like, man, that song impacted my life. You probably just mean it made you get a little groovy, right? So impact and influence and power and all these things, they could be defined a lot of ways. What you want to do is define it by what the Bible says impact is. And that's the way that you define it. So by understanding what the Bible means by impact, then you know what your goal is. But if you don't know what the goal is, you don't know what you're trying to create, right? So then you want to think about that. They're very easy. The first one, if we look at this one, it's very similar to the 5 finish lines. So this is a strategy. These are the strategy themes. The next one is, we'll just do spheres here. And then the next one is geography. All right, so if you go into strategy, these are very similar to the 5 finish lines. So again, that's why the 5 finish lines are so important, because they keep you holistic, right? If you only look at the Great Commission through the lens of one finish line, it's not the holistic picture of God's love. You want to understand Jesus' love is bigger than compassion. It's bigger than just evangelism. It's bigger than just church. God's love is everything coming at you. It's the fullness of who Jesus Christ is. And so when you pray for Jesus to show up, you're asking for the fullness of who he is. Not just the gospel, not just evangelism, not just discipleship, not just compassion. Everything is coming at them. That's the way that you're thinking and you're praying and you're asking the Lord to bring in a revival, so to say. All right, so I'm going to go over them a little bit. I won't highlight all of them, but one of them that I'm going to mention that's a little different from the 5 finish lines, because most of them cross over, is number 2, if you look at strategic themes. It's mobilizing prayer. So when you're looking at anything that's impacting people, you're asking yourself, is there prayer? Is the church praying? Because no one else can pray, right? You got to be saved at least. Or are people praying? Maybe the church isn't established in the area. So like you're asking yourself, along with the Bible, along with evangelism, is prayer being impacted in all of these areas? The next one is, that leads into this one actually. So you kind of get that, right? It's the same thing I talked about for like the whole day yesterday. All right, the next one is spheres. This is, this one's easy. It's easy. When you think about spheres, you somewhat think about jobs, even though that's not really how they are. But the idea is that the spheres are like arts and entertainment, celebration, economics, science and technology, media, family, things like that. Every society of human beings have spheres. The goal with the spheres is that you would see all of the spheres come for the finish lines on every human being. So, all right, what we sometimes think is, I'll give you a story so that you understand it. Sometimes what we think is that the church, the religious sphere, so to say, even though the church is supposed to be kind of all of them, the church is more or less kind of inside of all of the spheres. So, but sometimes what we think is that the church on its own will make the impact. Or sometimes somebody might think the business on its own might make the impact. But the idea is it's not just one or the other. The idea is that you bring in all of the spheres together to accomplish the 5 finish lines. All right, so like in Taguig, right? We have a dilemma. There's 100,000 people that gave their life to Jesus. That's when we stopped. Actually, we stopped evangelizing at that point. So we're asking ourselves, how did we get to 127,000? Because there's around 250,000 people under the age of 18. So that's like half of them. So if you're thinking about the church only doing the work, then you're limiting yourself to like frameworks like cell group, or frameworks like street evangelism, or frameworks like bring them to church, right? You limit yourself in that way. But let's just say you think about it. How can we use all of the spheres to evangelize a key target population in the city? And so here's another thing in my secret pouch. All right? In my secret pouch, what you got to know is the people that give their lives to Jesus Christ, 80% over the entire planet, universally in every country, any language, is below the age of 18. 80% of all conversions are below the age of 18. So you just got to know that. It doesn't mean you don't evangelize people above 18, but you just got to know a critical mass that is normally fertile for impacting is below the age of 18. All right, I got another thing in my secret pouch. All right, 70% of that 80% is below the age of 14. So that means between the age of 4 to 14 is where something like 70% of the planet will give their lives to Jesus. That's where it comes from. So when you're looking at where is the harvest going to be, sometimes it's usually going to be somewhere there. All right, you're going to notice this. You might notice this in some of your countries. In countries that persecute Christians, the first people they take out that you can't influence are the kids. If you go to Muslim countries or Hindu countries or things like that, you can't touch their kids. You know why? Because they know they might get influenced by dirty little men that love Jesus, right? They know that, so they cover them. Guess what Hitler made, right? Hitler is a freaking crazy guy. Guess what he did, right? What did Hitler do? What did Hitler do when he started taking over all these areas in World War II? He started making cartoons. Because he made cartoons and the kids fell in love with Hitler. Because he knew if I'm going to again, we're not thinking about down 6 months. We're not thinking about 8 months, 5 years. Hitler's thinking 10, 20, 30, 50 years. Down the line, how am I going to completely transform this country? And the way he knows that, he'll slaughter all of the top ones that won't change to his mentality, and he'll raise up the young ones to completely love him. They do that all day. It's demonic because it's so strategic. But those tools are the same things that the Holy Spirit gave us to operate in. But you can't let the demons keep taking them. You can't let Satan keep taking the special seasoning in your pouch. You got to use it. That's what that thing's for. That's why wisdom of God is there. This isn't like, okay, even most of the unreached people groups I've seen saved are below the age of 14. They convert just as easily as a Catholic. 70% of all Muslims under the age of 18 know that there's something outside of Islam now. They know there's something else. Because of the internet, because of the movies, because of globalization, they're now in a generation where they're thinking, wait, Islam's not the only thing I got. They're wondering what's out there. Most of the discipleship for Muslim women is on the internet. They can't go to a church because they'll get persecuted. The church will get persecuted. So they kick them out. So they get discipled through chat rooms. They get discipled by the internet. They go to places like that. You have to take advantage of the weak points of a society. And you have to use that for God's glory. If there's tons of kids that don't know who Jesus is and they're willing to listen to you, then you tell tons of kids who Jesus is. There's a place where you need to be bold. There's 2 ways you can attack. One is you can ram your head on a wall like this. Right? And then you're hoping one day your head will crack that wall. A lot of people do that. A lot of people look at a strategy, they think it's going to work, they look at a wall, and they just bang their head on it until it breaks. And you know what? It doesn't. It won't break. What you have to do is, oh, look, there's a wall. Oh, look, the wall ends. I'm going to just walk through here then. Every society has weak points. Every population, every people group has a unfortified area. It has a soft target. What you have to do when you engage a population is you have to go over the soft target, the place that's not fortified, the place that's easy to get into. And normally, that will be the children. One time I was talking to one of the coordinators, which now we call field leaders. And I was saying I was talking to her and I was saying all right, this is good, right? This is good. Look how many kids are out here. And I was like, check this out. There's a school right here. And I'm like, look, there's all these, there's this going on. And I was like, man, if I was a trafficker, I could totally take over this whole section. Because they're looking for, you know what traffickers do? They look for places that are weak and then they penetrate. That's why they're so effective. But then that's not necessarily demonic. It's demonic what they do with it. Because when we get in, you're supposed to edify. When they get in, they tear down. So that's the way you're always thinking, right? You're always asking yourself, how can I build something that will edify people around me and not have to fight against a brick wall? So you look for the soft target. All right, anyways, that's why spheres are so important. Because you have to ask yourself, one of the soft targets of the Philippines is the schools. There's very rare countries on the planet that will let people come in and access their children. It's incredibly rare. Part of it is also because Catholicism came in. And so that was a bit of a benefit because people here fear Jesus somewhat. And so, but the idea though is that it's not being, there needs to be a movement coming out of it a little bit more. It just needs to be tweaked a little bit. But that's the idea there. You can look at all of these spheres and you can see if there's areas where you can penetrate. So in some places it might be business, right? In other countries, like some of my friends work with, they almost have every single sphere penetrated. They engage 120,000 students every week with biblical character and values. They have some of the richest and most powerful government politicians and businessmen in the circle of God's kingdom there. That's actually one of the countries that I'm not going to, but someone else in Call to All is at. But what they're doing is they're using the spheres to impact the country. In some of these countries that Call to All is working in, the vice or the prime minister, or even the vice prime minister, is coming up to our leaders and saying, "Do you have a 5-year plan for our country?" If someone asked you, "What's the 5-year plan for the Philippines?" you want to ask yourself, "What is it?" That's what you're thinking. Because if you're thinking of transformation over a whole country, you're asking yourself, what does that look like? And so that happens. You really want to think about that. When we say we want to go impact the country, what are we actually saying we're going to do? And then that's what you want to actually go after. All right, let's go ahead and move over from societal spheres. Let's go to geographical alls. All right, so I'm going to go over and draw this little picture over here. Geographical alls is kind of like a telescope a little bit. Well, maybe not. But it goes from very wide to very narrow. That's how this operates. So when you think of the world, you want to be able to see it from a bird's eye view, and you want to be able to see it from a granular view. You want to see all of it. You don't want to just see bits and pieces here and there. You want to look at what is the whole world, and then you want to look at what's the littlest piece of the whole population of the planet, which is a human being. All right, so it starts out with countries. This is normally where we stop as missionaries. When we think as missions, we usually think, okay, I'm in the country, I'm good. You gotta get more detailed. You have to zoom in more with that. Let's say you're thinking about Bago or your city or some place that you're at or something like that. Okay, you're in the Philippines. You're in a district of whatever district or region it's in, right? And then it breaks in from the region into the barangay. And then from the barangay, you can go into the situ or something like that. Yeah, the situ. But the idea is that I'm gonna give you this, all right? The first one is the country. And then it goes into bigger regions of the country, which are omega zones. But I'm not gonna so much get into that right now. It's just that, okay, you look at the Philippines. Where's the Philippines at? Oh, we don't have it here. How many regions are in the Philippines? 18? 12? Only 12? All right. Is there 18? Yeah. Okay, so there's 18 regions of the Philippines. So there's one country, but then there's 18 regions. If you break this down, there's 135 cities, I believe. If you break this down, there's around 65 urban cities, and then the rest are rural cities. And then as you break it down, these cities are surrounded by, there's a place of a market. You'll notice that cities are made from markets. Because the area, the epicenter of the city is where people buy and sell things, right? So here, I'm going to give you a little trick with Apostle Paul here. All right, go to page 6. All right, let me, actually, this is actually a good study right here. All right, let's go to omega zones real quick. I'm going to go through this, and then you're going to take a break, all right? So just chill for a second. All right. When we look at Paul, he's looking at the countries that he needs to impact. And then as you see in, I'm going to go number 2, right? Romans 15. But now I no longer have a place to work in these parts. Having a great desire these many years, I come to you. Whenever I journey to Spain. Spain was the next area where he knew that he would be able to create an epicenter of that area of the world. The Philippines is an epicenter of Asia. That's what this thing is. All right, so then you break it down again. You go into the next omega zone, but you go into the next, smaller area of it, and it's Acts 16:12. from where we traveled to Philippi, a Roman colony. It is an important city, that part of Macedonia. Why is it an important city? Because he uses it as a regional center to raise up his leaders. So he goes inside of the country, he goes inside of the regions, and then he goes inside of the important areas where he can raise up leaders that he could send out to all of the other areas. That's what Paul is doing here. And then he goes on and then he breaks it down even more. He says, this is number 4, Acts 17:17. So he went to the synagogue. That's the religious area. There he talked to the Jews and the Greeks who worship God. And then where did he penetrate next? He spoke with anyone who happened to be in the marketplace. Because the marketplace is the epicenter for the community. If ever you're wondering when you target a community, where is everyone going to be going? It's normally the marketplace. It doesn't mean that's where you do all of your evangelism, but you just need to know that's the way cities are made. That's the way communities are made. They have to have some kind of market people can go in and out of. All right, the next one is, like for example, I'll give you a story here. One of the things that we're thinking about in South Asia, some of the places that you're going to, some of these rural areas, is there's all of these villages, rural villages. And they span very far. Some of them are like 1 hour, hour and a half, 2-3 hours, something like that. And so we're asking ourselves, well, where is the best place that you could penetrate? If you're going to impact 6 villages, where would you go? Or what would you do? If you're trying to get the entire region of this area, how would you do it? Well, you break it down by country, you go into the regions, you start going into the cities, and you start looking inside of the little area, and you ask yourself, well, is there a place where everybody goes to already? And then what you'll find even in rural areas, like in South Asia, in villages, which some of you are going to go to, like they'll have a section where 5, 6, 7, maybe 10 villages all go to get groceries. And so if you were going to raise up a hub, you would raise it up there. Because if you penetrated that one village, you would penetrate all of them. You see that? So even in Bogol or something, right? Or in your community or whatever it is, you're asking yourself, well, my church is in this area. But that may not be the epicenter of where you need to do the work. The work, you have to always think of it like this. The work isn't where the church is. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. Most of the time it's not. Most of the time the church is somewhere else, but the lost are over there. So you have to either bring your church members there or you have to start a work over there if you're going to penetrate that one area. So you're always asking yourself, where is the epicenter of these regions? And then it goes down from neighborhoods, and then it goes into actually neighborhoods. It says here homes, but actually the way that you would break down a neighborhood is schools, right? So whenever I'm looking at a geographical map and I'm trying to understand the population, where's the density of the population, I look at, well, where are the schools? In South Daang Hare, one of the regions you're going to, it's very small. I don't know exactly how small it is, but it's it's really small. It's like half a mile long, something like that, which I don't know what that is in kilometers. That might be, whatever. It's small. It's not that big. But there's 30,000 people that live there. And so they have 3 elementary schools there. And each school is like 1,000, 2,000 plus. So what it shows me is that in that area alone, there's so many kids. Right? In Bagambayan, how many elementaries? Like 1, right? Yeah, 1. Because the density is covered by your commercial area, right? When you go to South Daang Hare, there's 3. And then if you go to Upper Bikutan, that area over there, there's 2 kind of side by side. There's 2 schools there, but each one is 7 to 10,000, 7 or 3,000 big. So those 2 schools alone carry 10,000 people. So when you look at a region, if you look at the schools, you'll see where the communities are. And so when you penetrate, you have to ask yourself, are we in an area where the communities are open to this kind of stuff? Where it's going to be soft ground, so to say. All right. The next one is, as it goes down, it goes into families. And so families you find by homes. I know that sounds very obvious, but if you were to look at this, right? You guys did your mid-lecture outreach. All right, you guys did your mid-lecture outreach. We estimated that there was 3,000, around maybe 2,000 people there. And remember your outreach a long time ago in Naik? When we had 2 shows, like a basketball court? So we're asking ourselves, did we have an effective outreach? How do you gauge that? Right? So you go through some of these dynamics here, but then you also ask yourself, okay, if we're doing an outreach, well, there's only 300, 400 kids here. That's not that many. Because if we go to Taguig, we could see 10,000 kids in like one area. But how are you measuring it? Right? That's what you're asking yourself. So one of the ways that when you go into a community is you're asking yourself, well, how many people are in the community? If you go to the government, sometimes they don't even know, especially in areas of Asia. But what you could do is you could zoom out on the map and you could count the houses. And the average family in the Philippines has 5 kids, or it's a family of 5. So when you zoom out and you count the houses, and then you multiply that by 5, you have an estimate of what the population is there. And so that's why when we did our outreach, I was able to gauge, we evangelized something like 70% of the youth in the whole community, which is really important to know because we're going to keep going back there. And since we know that the youth is already engaging with the gospel, we can start building with it. But that's one of the ways that you could break down the families, is you actually start counting the houses. All right, now the last one is every individual going down to here. And so that's one of the things that you're really looking at at the end of the day, is every individual accounted for? Are you able to reach every individual? That's what you're aiming for. So here's the idea too. If you don't have a plan, you will probably execute 0% of it. All right? How many of you ever been on a weight loss program or something? Right? A diet or something like that, right? Okay, I want you to think about a diet or even a six-pack plan, right? Jazer, where's your six-pack plan? I gave up mine a long time ago. All right, imagine you got a six-pack plan, but you don't got a plan. When's your six-pack gonna come? Not, right? It ain't never gonna come. If you ain't got no six-pack plan, you ain't gonna have no six-pack. All right, but let's just say you had a six-pack plan. All right, I'm gonna do 100 crunches a minute for like 10 minutes a day, for like lunch, dinner, and like when I wake up. And I'm gonna stop eating all of this lumpia and rice or something. And I'm not gonna eat a bunch of, the rice cakes. Torta or something like that, whatever. And you're like, I'm not gonna eat that stuff. And I'm gonna run 3 times a week. I'm gonna run 3 times a week. I'm gonna run 3 times a week, right? Okay, now imagine you didn't do that, but you did half of it. You still would have done maybe 200 push-ups, 200 sit-ups a day. You still may have ran once, and then maybe a half, which is like you run into the dorm to eat. Or something like that, right? Or you may have done like a couple of push-ups every day or something like that. But you achieving half of your plan is still way bigger than the no plan. And so when you're thinking about human beings, you want to have a plan. Because if you don't have a plan, you just may not impact anyone. You might just go to some area and you're like, whoop-de-whoop, de-doop-de-doo, de-doop-de-doo, and then you don't know what you're doing. And then you're hoping you get an idea, which works. But what happens to the day you don't have an idea? Right? Everyone has those days, right? Where it's like, all right, I'm going to just open up the Bible and I'm just going to let the Holy Spirit talk to me right out the cuff. Right? It doesn't, like you don't have any plan whatsoever. Maybe you might have a plan. I'm going to read Proverbs, might be something from the Old Testament. You got some kind of plan. But let's just say you don't have any plan. Your only plan is just to like, all right, I'm just going to wake up. I'm just going to look at the Bible. What happens to those days where you don't want to wake up? And you don't know, you're in a bad mood. And then you look at the Bible and you're all like, sinners go to hell. Jesus judged them. Pharisees whitewashed tombs. And you're like, what are you doing? There's always these days where you just can't work up the charisma to figure it out. And that's why you want to be able to engage in a longer range. That's why you want to be thinking longer. I always have this thing with God. You can never subtract the fact that he is unexpectedly going to break in. You could never subtract that. He's always going to do something impossible unexpectedly. So you expect he's going to be unexpectedly breaking in miraculously. But that doesn't mean that you don't make a plan. Because you make a plan, he could break it, he could change your steps, he could do anything to it. But I expect him to do that. But I also expect in the Bible it says to make a plan. So I know that if I make the plan and then he breaks in, I'm covering all of the biblical attributes that Jesus told us to walk in when he said count the cost and all that.